All right, welcome back to False Count Radio, and now we are joined on the line by Fritz Von Goering. Fritz, how are you doing today?
Well, good as it gets.
I apologize for the bad connection I had there at first. Now we're going to definitely talk a lot about your wrestling life, a little bit about your early life. A lot of our fans of the show, our listeners, aren't really that familiar with you simply because you stopped wrestling before a lot of the current fans were born. I'm actually one of the few that did know about you because I'm aware that you grew up in Chicago. I did as well, and so did my grandfather, who did watch you growing up. So I was a little bit familiar with you, although I've never seen you. So, we're definitely looking forward to learning a lot about you. We have a few generic questions and some specialized to your career. So if you're ready, we'll go ahead and get started.
All right, go ahead. Start asking questions.
All right. Now, can you talk a little bit about your life growing up in Chicago?
Well, not much of a life, really. During the Depression, we didn't have a lot of money, and, things were kind of tough. I go to school, and usually you have to fight to get to school, keep your lunch. They come steal it from you, I had a lot of fights on the way to school when I was a kid. I really was glad when we moved out of there in 1939, came out to California. So really, my early days in Chicago wasn't the best. I do know that the people back there in those days had a lot of respect for their old gangster Al Capone. He opened up some soup kitchens and some shelters for the homeless, so he wasn't all that bad.
Now, growing up, were you a wrestling fan? And if so, who were some of your coach?
Yeah, I started going trying to get to the matches. My uncle used to take me to boxing and some of the wrestling matches around Chicago. Watched, back in 37, I watched Lou Thesz and I watched Bobby Manikoff. They were both young then. They were just getting started. And I believe Lou took the NWA title back in 37. He's always sort of been you might say, a hero. And later years, I got in the ring against him, went after that title, and a few years after that, when we were at the wrestling reunions, we become pretty good friends.
Okay. Now, was professional wrestling your first career choice, and if not, what was?
Well, I kind of started out thinking about football, but they just wasn't making the kind of money when you get into the pro end of it. So that's why I chose wrestling. In California, they didn't teach wrestling, so I had to learn from the wrestlers, the wrestling clubs, and that's basically where I learned. Learned it the hard way, you might say.
Yeah, definitely. Now, well, in the days that you were breaking into the business, training was a lot different from how it is now. Can you talk a little bit about your training?
Well, we first the wrestlers would work you over pretty good, try to discourage you from coming back, And I just kept coming back to the gyms and finally decided, well, let's show this kid a few things, and that's how I learned the wrestling. But and then I learned from a few guys who were good Olympic wrestlers, and Doc Northrup was one. He was an Olympic wrestler. He won the Pan American Games when he was 40 years old. He taught wrestling in San Francisco. And, of course, I picked up a few others from some of the other guys. I learned one of them was from Ireland, and his name was Paddy Muldoon. And he learned from the old Wigan snake pit, so he taught me some of that. And I just picked it up as I went. And Joe Pazendak, from Minneapolis, you guys have probably never heard of him. He trained Pat O'Connor and George Gordienko and myself, and we all moved into his place, and he trained us. And George Gordienko his contract was paid by the office, the Minneapolis wrestling office. Tony Stecker, Pat O'Connor, he bought his contract out, and I worked mine out the hard way. I worked around his place 6 hours a day to pay my keep and help him build a house, and that's how I got my contract paid. But yeah, I spent a lot of time with Joe. This is to wrestle. This has nothing to do with going in the ring. This is the wrestling part of it.
So it sounds like your trainer was in a lot of ways a father figure to you.
More like, yeah. Well, Joe was he spent more time with me than any of them, and all three of the guys that he trained were all in the Iowa Wrestling Hall of Fame for the wrestlers that were honored for their wrestling ability. So, in fact, George was just inducted. Of course, he passed on a few years ago, but his relatives came and picked up his honors. But of the best, I'd say George was the best of the three of us. He was good. He traveled around Europe and all over the world. He took on all comers.
Now, do you have any memories of wrestling Buddy Rogers?
Yeah, I went up against Buddy many times. Buddy was, if you want to know more about Buddy, it was probably best well told in Lou Thesz's book called Hooker. And as Lou described Buddy, he was a great performer, and he could draw some crowds. And he's been exposed to TV, and he was a box office draw, you might say.
Now, do you have any personal memories of your time with Buddy Rogers?
I don't go into any of that.
Okay.
He wasn't my best friend. I didn't really like the guy, if you want to know the truth, but I'm going to give him his dues. He was a great performer, and like I say, a box office draw, and I did make money going up against him. So, there's good and bad about everybody.
Now, in the days that you wrestled, the good guys versus bad guys sort of thing that we've become accustomed to in recent years, it hasn't really caught on yet. So really, what was it that made you such a bad guy, so to speak?
It beats the hell out of me, if you want the truth. I was a bad-looking kid when I started out. Dolores said, hey, the crowds are going to like you. So when they stuck me in with some of the biggest, ugliest, hairiest-looking guys you ever see, I went up against Wee Willie Davis and then Hans Schnabel and Carl Davis and some of those other guys. Chet Bernard, they call him Barney Bernard, and Shoulders Newman, all these guys, the old-timers. And they get in the ring and they'd say, hey, kill that punk kid. They just didn't like me. And I didn't go out of my way to do anything to irritate the crowd. So I come back in the dressing room, the promoter would say, what the heck's the matter with you anyway? The crowd doesn't like you. I said, I don't know. There's just something about me they don't like. So that's how I kind of turned into a bad guy. I just, for some reason, they just never took to me.
Now, you were an Irish kid from Chicago and later San Francisco. Who came up with the name Fritz Von Goering, and were you originally against that idea?
Well, I came from Minneapolis. The Tony Stecker, the Stecker family gave me Fritz Von Ohm first, and they changed it to Goering later on. So that's where I picked up my name.
Now, do you have any memories of your time with Giant Baba?
Going back, say again.
Do you have any memories of your time with the Giant Baba?
Baba. No. Giant Baba. Well, yeah, okay, yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah, Japan. Yeah, me and Mike Caduceus, we beat him for the international tag team title, I believe. That was back in '66, and we toured Japan. He was with a team guy by the name of Yoshimura, something, I can't remember the last name, but they were both good wrestlers. Yeah, I wrestled him many times all over Japan. Yeah, we drew quite a few houses, big ones. And yeah, he was a great wrestler.
Hello, Mr. Goring. Speaking of Japan wrestling, coming from America, was it hard to adjust to the style of wrestling over in Japan? And can you give us any more your memories of working over in Japan? And also how the German character got over in Japan.
Well, let's tell you the truth. There was two towns that they cheered me. They stood up and actually applauded because they introduced me from Germany, and that was in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the two towns that we pretty well wiped out with the A-bomb. In fact, I beat the local boy in Hiroshima, and they all stood up and applauded, and he bowed, and he wanted to carry my bag for me and all that, but there's a lot of heat over there, you might say, even probably today in those two cities that were pretty well devastated in the war. But the Japanese people, I think it's a great country, and I really enjoyed going over there. The wrestlers were good, and they trying hard, and of course Americans were beating them pretty good, and they try to take you in the ring, or so they had to hire Karl Gotch, a German wrestler, to come over there and teach them some wrestling. And he did a good job. He turned some of them into some pretty fair Olympic wrestlers. Some of the young guys that wanted to go to his class. He also taught some of the boys that were sumos that slimmed down a little bit how to wrestle, but mainly take care of themselves and don't let the Americans beat them up so bad.
Sending Karl Gotch over there would be like the equivalent of sending, say, a Kurt Angle over there nowadays to teach these boys something, right? Are you familiar with Kurt Angle?
Yeah, Kurt. From what I hear, a pretty darn good wrestler. He won a gold, and it's that'll always be with him. Gotch never did win the gold in the Olympics, but he spent years in Wigan, England, at the Snake Pit, and I put him up against most wrestlers today. There's a few of them out there that I'll tell you, they ask me, who do you think would win? I just tell them, well, I had to buy a ticket to see that match. And one of them alive today is Danny Hodge. He's probably one of the greatest living wrestlers around. Vern Gagne was one of the great ones, too. And then naturally Carl, but George Gordienko was also one of the best out there that could wrestle. And so all of those guys I knew, of course, don't sell Lou Fez short. He was another great wrestler. He had a fantastic ability. He was tough in the ring, too. I know,
one of the best of all time.
Yeah, he was. And Bobby Manigoff was another one. Bobby was from Chicago. So there were quite a few of them. Most of those old guys in the 30s knew how to wrestle. It wasn't they just outperforming. They knew the fundamentals of wrestling, and they were all tough. And those are the guys that we learned from, and we honor those guys today. There's so darn many of them out there that names have gone and they've forgotten about it. It's a shame, because there were a lot of great ones.
Oh, it happens. I mean, I hate going to an arena these days, and you mentioned guys like a Lou Thez, or even more recently, say like a Terry Funk or a Bob Backlund, and fans look at you and they're like, "Who's that?" It's sad because people don't know the history of wrestling.
Yeah, well, Terry comes from a great wrestling family. Dory Funk, he was just about as tough as they come, and Terry, he had the NWA title for a while, and he just was inducted into the Wrestling Hall of Fame in Iowa. So he's been honored to got his dues. So I've known Terry. Goes way back to the 1960s. He's been around a long time. He held up.
And speaking of Texas wrestling, and another fellow German character. Do you have any? You once wrestled Fritz Von Erich. What was that like? Can you tell us any memories of that?
Yeah, Fritz, was also a great drawing card. I went up against him in Toronto. They figured, well, he's the bad guy and I'll be the good guy. But it didn't work out that way. The people went for Fritz. They said, kill that punk. He went back to the booking office and says, don't ever book me with that guy again.
That's great.
But later on, he offered, he wanted me to team up with him, as a partner, and I turned it down. I didn't think I wanted to team up with him. But nothing about, him himself. I believe he ran the Texas office. Of course, I quit in 1973, so I never got involved with Fritz in wrestling promotion. But he took the Dallas, Texas office over, and he ran that for a few years before he passed on.
Right. In your long, illustrious career, who would you consider to be your favorite opponent you've ever worked with?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I wrestled with some great guys in my day. Lou, naturally one of them. Dick Hutton was another one when he was the NWA champion. Great wrestler. Bobby Manigoff. It's just a list of guys that I went up against. Danny Hodge. They're all good individually. Luther Lindsay we used to go work out at the gym, and he was a tough wrestler, and he passed away back in the 70s, which is a shame. They inducted him into the museum also. Of course, I went up against guys like Bronco Nagurski, which was a famous football player. Most people don't even know who you're talking about. I bet you don't even remember him, huh?
I've heard the name, and I know my history. I've seen the pictures, and I've heard of Bronco. Yep.
Bronco is also from Minneapolis. They have some pretty tough guys come out of Minneapolis. Also, in Canada, Hamilton, Ontario produced a lot of great wrestlers. But when Bronco was inducted into the museum, his boy took the honor. He said, I was just a little kid when I used to watch Fritz wrestle against my dad. It puts a few years on you,
You mentioned Hamilton, Ontario, and I can't help but think about Canada's self-proclaimed greatest athlete, Iron Mike Sharp. His father was a wrestler, longtime wrestler up there, too. Do you have any memories of the Sharp family?
The Sharp brothers, Mike and Ben, considered one of the best tag teams that we've had in years. That's back in the old NWA days. The Sharp brothers were great. That's all I can say about them. I teamed up with them on 6-man team matches, and I teamed up with Ben many times. And they're both gone now, but boy, I'll tell you, at one time they were top. They were a top team. They used to go up against the Torres brothers, Enrique and Ramon Torres. I don't know if you've heard of them or not. And then there was George Scott, was another great wrestler that used to go up against those guys. I don't know if their names mean anything to you.
Oh, absolutely, George Scott. He became one of wrestling's greatest promoters. If it wasn't for George Scott, wrestling in the 70s and the 80s probably wouldn't have been as popular as it was with some of his booking and promoting.
Okay.
Yeah, George Scott's very well known.
Yeah.
What's your all-time favorite memory in your career? Maybe inside the ring or doing something outside of the ring, whether it was charity work or something. But what was your all-time favorite memory of being in the business?
Well, I don't know. I just travel around from one territory to another, and just try to keep from getting banged up so I could go into the ring the next day. My best memories, I'd say, it's not just one memory in particular. It's a whole mess of memories, a bunch of them that I had, all the guys I met and talked to, especially the old timers that used to come down to the dressing room. And those guys, you know, you'd sit and we'd talk to them, you'd learn. I used to have long conversations with a great old amateur wrestler by the name of Ad Santel, promoter in Oakland. He one of the guys that actually trained Lou. And you can learn an awful lot just by sitting and talking to them. I guess those you'd say are the best memories I had in wrestling. Not of any experience. I've had some wild times, you might say, crazy matches, and some of them were pretty exciting too. But I'd say the best times that I can remember are just sitting and talking and listening to some of those old guys tell their stories. And that's probably forgot most of them today. That's the memories I had.
Now you talk about the old timers coming into the locker room. In today's business, it's very frowned upon if a young superstar comes into a locker room and doesn't walk up to each and every one of the guys in the locker room and greets them and says hello and welcomes them. Was that very customary back in your day too? Was everybody in the same locker room, or you know, were the good guys in one locker room, the bad guys in another, or was there a lot of camaraderie between you guys?
Well, usually, like in the Olympic Auditorium in downtown Los Angeles, you know, it's just a big spread out locker room with many spaces where you could, you know, dressing rooms, you might say, where you just change and get ready for the matches. So the guys are kind of split up, but the old guys would come down and they'd go through and we'd, you know, talk to them. Actually, happy to see them, but I never go to wrestling matches anymore. It's a different game nowadays, and so I just kind of stay away from it.
Do you ever watch the product on TV?
No, I never watch on TV. But you see, but I give them credit for what they do. They take a lot of risk and a lot of chances, and of course, it's all different together promotion. You know, It seems that the bigger guys have taken over, and they've pretty well eaten up the small territories. At one time, we had about 39 territories that they could wrestle, and guys were working every night. Nowadays, it's just a few that are working, and then some of the small territories have opened up, but they're not doing what the big TV guys are doing, out on the East Coast. And it's pretty well changed, like in San Francisco, they had a whole lot. You'd work every night, a town somewhere in that area. Los Angeles had over 60 towns running at one time. So, it's really gone down. Now it's just a big show, you might say. In one of the large cities, they'll pick out L.A. or they'll pick out San Francisco and run their shows, but they run it all off of their TV. And that's how they work it now. It's a different game.
At what era did it really make you decide that you didn't want to watch the product anymore? I said, what year would you say?
Well, I quit in �73, and I got busy. I bought a trucking business on the Interstate hauling, which was kind of a mistake. But I was busy running that. I didn't have time to watch any kind of TV, and then went in the used car business and had a used small lot and was selling cars. And, I never got around TV too much until later years. And when I turned the dial and I saw what's going on TV, a little different, but, it's like I say, I got to give those guys credit and respect because, they earn their money. They work hard and they take some real risks, and I know it's going to toll on them. The damage that they do to themselves, it's going to hurt them in later years. But that's where I'll leave it. I just don't watch it anymore. I just lost interest. Sometimes I'll get involved and watch martial arts programs. Pretty good shows.
Who do you like in mixed martial arts? Who impresses you?
Well, I don't have really any favorites. I knew some of I never met any of the guys. There's some up and coming guys that work for McMahon in the WWE. But names fall off. I can't remember the names. You probably know who I'm talking about.
Well, there's Brock Lesnar, who was in the WWE. He was a world champion for a while, but he was also a 4-time Division I All-American at Minnesota in wrestling, and now he's the heavyweight champion in UFC, which is the main brand of mixed martial arts. So it's kind of a notch to the pro wrestling game that their heavyweight champion is a pro wrestler.
Yeah.
A fake wrestler is their champion in a real sport.
Yeah, he was a good one, and so I never watched any programs that he was on, but one of the judges to these shows in California is Gene LaBelle. I don't know if the name means anything to you.
Yes, actually a move used in wrestling that it's just incorporated into the WWE is named after him by a young man by the name of Daniel Bryant, whose main gimmick is he's a shooter. So his main finisher is named after Gene LaBelle. So that name is very prominent in the WWE television right now.
Yeah, well, Gene, he's still a judge in California, and last time I talked to him, he still does a little stunt work in the movies, and he teaches judo, I think, once a week. So he's still active at it. He's about in mid-70s somewhere, so he's doing real good.
Excellent.
So I've known Gene ever since the beginning of time, you might say, as long as he's been in the business. So we're pretty good friends. I still communicate with Gene.
Now, we talked about shooters and hookers before. You mentioned them a little bit. Did you ever get to work with Lou Thesz? And if so, was he legitimately as tough as everybody says he was?
Yes. Yeah, Lou was good. He was tough. He was a real good wrestler. Dick Hutton was another one. He was great out of Oklahoma. Won 3-time NCAA titles on Dick Hutton. He was, I guess many people don't know or remember him because he wasn't published that much or pushed that hard, which was a mistake. Pat O'Connor was a good wrestler out of New Zealand. And boy, Joe Pazendak got all over and trained him even more. Thesz was good. And, I went up against him a few times, and I couldn't really beat him no way I could beat him.
Towards the end of your career, you worked for Roy Shire. Do you have any memories of him you can share with us fans?
Roy was a pretty darn good promoter, a smart one. He came in. He was the beginning of what's going on today, really. I could see the wrestling starting to change from the time he took it in the 70s. And that's when I decided to get out of it. It was starting to change what they were doing. Besides, I'm getting old, and I just decided it was time to quit. But no, Roy he came out to San Francisco, and Joe Malkowitz had the territory. And Roy got TV, and Joe had no real contracts with anybody, and he just opened up the show. I believe the first show he drew out the Cow Palace was about $50,000, and he was on his way. Of course, he had some backing behind him from Barnett out of Indianapolis, and the money behind him, he pushed him, and he took over the territory. So, Roy, he did a pretty good job as a promoter. And I think Ray Stevens was one of his top guys out there.
Right. You mentioned the San Francisco territory before. Guys like Ray Stevens and Freddie Blassie, they come to mind, basically when you think about, the Cow Palace in San Francisco. They were legends out. John Tolos, guys like that.
Yeah. Yeah, all those guys were great. But Freddie Blassie was a great card, drawing card in Los Angeles. Also, there's another guy that nobody talks about anymore. That was Ricky Starr.
Oh,
Ricky
yeah, he was famous.
He was a fine amateur wrestler besides. A lot of guys didn't give him credit. He bounced around on those ballet tights and lace shoes. Say, this guy, you know, he sure fooled some of the guys when they'd start to push him around, you know. No, I was a good friend of Ricky's, and he was a good drawing card down in Los Angeles. But you said Blassie, yeah, I like Freddie. He was one of the top drawing cards, and Tolis and all those guys, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, through the years, we talked about Roy Shire as a promoter and other guys. But who is your favorite and least favorite promoters, and can you ever give us reasons why?
Well, going back when I started, Joe Malkowitz out of San Francisco, he was one of the old-timers, you know, and then the Tony Stecker and the Stecker family out of Minneapolis. And those guys were promoters, you might say. Don Owens was a darn good promoter up in Portland, you know. And
that's JT's neck of the woods.
Yeah. No, Don, he ran a pretty good territory. And I had a lot of respect for him. And like I say, Harry Elliott up in Washington, worked with him. Then Rod Fenton up in Vancouver was another good promoter. So there's more. You just can't say this is the best of the bunch. Jules Strongbow in Los Angeles was a darn good promoter. Him and Saunders Zavo, they ran that booking office down there.
Right.
And I worked for all those guys. So there's so many of them out there. Max Clayton was another one. You probably never heard that name. Out of Omaha, Nebraska. No. But you talk to anybody that worked for Max, you'd know that he was a darn good payoff guy and treated the guys right. Stu Hart was another guy in Calgary. The weather was cold and the trips were tough. But in all my days in wrestling, I never heard anyone ever say an unkind word about Stu.
Did you ever travel down to the dungeon?
Well, no, I never worked out with him in the dungeon. Didn't see any reason to go down there and, you know, get all banged up for no reason. There's no money in it. I know Luther Lindsay went down there and with him a few times. And when Stu passed away, there was a picture of Luther in his wallet. Did you ever hear that story?
No, I haven't.
And I knew why too, because Luther beat him in his dungeon, and he had a lot of respect for Luther. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, Luther. He was highly respected, and Luther and I, we were enemies in the ring, but I had a lot of respect for Luther, and I traveled with him quite a bit, and worked out with him. And I'll tell you, he was tough, you know. I couldn't figure out how to beat him one day. I just figured, well, the only thing I can do is I got to hurt him. And I did. And he's taping up his wrist. And I asked Luther, I says, you know, let's stop today. We'll go back and finish tomorrow. He says, oh, no, we ain't through yet. We're not through. Till I say we're through. Yeah. But we're still good friends.
That's
I know. I kind of miss those guys. You know, Carl was another great amateur wrestler. You know, he was as tough as any of them. You know, and when he first came in, why the guys were scared of him. So he came into Ohio, why they had to find somebody to go after him or go up against him. So they picked me. You know, right away. Why we become friends with him, and remained that until he passed away a few years back. He used to keep conversation, you know, call him about every week or two, you know, see how he's doing. But they're all going away. You might say I'm about the last man out there, you know.
Well, God bless you.
All alone. Yeah. But a lot of memories, you know. A guy can, but you know, here's where it ends. Just about every wrestler that's been out there could write a book, and each book would be interesting because each life, you know, their lives all went in different directions, you know. So there's so many stories to be told, which will never be told, you know. But,
well, this is why it's such a great opportunity to have you on the air tonight, you know, and share these memories with us, because it is a platform for legends like yourself to inform the fans and teach the fans, like I was saying before, that people have never heard of the name Fritz Von Goering before. Well, maybe after hearing this, they're going to look a little more into you and be intrigued, you know.
Yeah, well, CNN gave me a write-up, you know, and it kind of brought a few people curiosity, you know. They decided to check me out, you know, on a Facebook, you know.
Right.
They would want to be friends and all that stuff, you know. All this computer thing is new to me. I don't have much, you know, I don't know that much about it, but yeah. And then I'm getting invited to different events and things, but.
Well, it's great that you stayed involved in the wrestling business, because in today's business, you see a lot of guys that retire and stay retired for maybe a year or two, and they just have that itch. You know, if the wrestling's in their blood, they want that adrenaline from the crowd, and they come back, and then they retire, and they come back, and it's like a revolving door with these guys. Now, what caused you, when you retired, you stayed retired, why is that, and why do you think so many guys go back? Is it that rush?
Yeah, you miss the roar of the crowd, and there's something about being out there every night, you know. It gets in your blood, you know. You put 20 years or more into it, you kind of miss that. I like I said, I went in the trucking business, interstate hauling. You know, I didn't have time to miss wrestling. I was too busy trying to keep those trucks going, you know, keep them running. So that, you know, kind of broke me away from the wrestling. But for a while, same with the car business, there was another, you know, just you don't have time. But it's still there, you know, and I still kept in touch with some of the guys. But like Kenji Shibuya, I guess you've heard of him.
Yep.
Well, you know, Kenji and I were pretty good friends back. We went back way over 50 years, and he passed away, and I did attend his service, and he was an honorary pallbearer. Also, Pepper Gomez, he was an opponent of mine for years and years, but, you know, I had a lot of respect for old Pepper. He died about 6 years ago. I went to his service. You know, that's the trouble. These guys are going away, and I try to stay in touch with a lot of them. You know, and some of them now have gone getting this Alzheimer's. You know, which is a bad thing. Guys like Red Bastien, I hear he's laid up with Vern Gagne and some of those guys. It's sad. But, Lord Blair's another one. He was a great wrestler in his day. You know, you name a wrestler, and there's a story behind him. And I believe that the stories are told over and over again sometimes, and that's how they get, I might say, they still, you know, keep them out there in the spotlight. So I hope I mentioned a few guys today that haven't been mentioned, and maybe people will maybe get on the computer and maybe look them up and check them out. There's probably something written about them, you know, and kind of bring them back a little bit, you know. Their memories should be out there. How long have you been in the business or connected with it?
I've been a lifelong fan. I'm 37 years old, and I've been watching since for 27 of those years, believe it or not. Watching Andre the Giant the first time on television got me hooked on watching wrestling, and I've been hooked ever since. Do you have any memories? Did you ever see Andre the Giant?
Well, I met him. After I'd quit, and I just briefly talked to him, and he seemed like a real nice guy. And of course, I knew the Angel, the old French Angel. He was a big dude also, and the Swedish Angel, and then the Sky High Lee was another one that had a large bone deficiency, you might say, or whatever. Huge giant of a guy, and like some of these giant guys are, The French Angel, he was quite a wrestler, big drawing card, and I remember him. But I did meet Andre, and I've gone out of my way to turn him on TV when I knew he was on, or heard about it, and he was good. He was a good wrestler.
Now, Fritz, last year you were inducted into the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame. Can you share your memories of that?
Well, I was in 2009, and I was inducted with two of my old buddies. They're deceased, but that's Carl Gotch and Luther Lindsay, and then Bronco Nagurski was also inducted. And I got to meet his boy. He was 10 years old when he was watching me wrestle his dad. Of course, his boy's a little bit older now. But Tony Nagurski, son, great kid, we got along real fine because I spent a lot of time up in Minnesota territory, and I knew where old Bronco lived up in International Falls. That's up by the Canadian border. It's too bad these guys aren't around to pick up the awards, No, it's memories of all those guys. There's a lot of stories to be told about Bronco Nagurski, and he was also a football player and wrestling. He had the world title wrestling, NWA title at the same time. So he was playing football and off wrestling.
He's a Hall of Fame football player and a Hall of Fame wrestler.
Yeah, that's right. He was playing pro ball, and he was NWA world title holder, and so he's defending his title and playing football. So he kept a busy schedule for a while. He, like most of the guys back in the days, he was a big spender, and this Tony Stecker took some of his money that he had coming, and he put it in the trust for him. He held it back, not to cheat him out of it, but just to hold it for him. When Tony passed away, Bronco was a pretty wealthy guy. Thanks to Tony. The Stecker family were great people. Of course, I don't know if you were familiar with them, because Vern Gagne took the territory from the Steckers, way back. And Vern was another great amateur wrestler. Also, he was a pretty fair basketball player. I'll give you one off that you've probably never heard of, but we went up against the Minneapolis Lakers back in the 50s when this is before they moved. And this is when George Mikan was playing basketball with them, Of course, they beat us. Yeah. But Vern, I remember he played some pretty good ball. He put a few in the basket, We challenged them to wrestle after that, and they refused. I remember we drew a pretty good crowd. But I think this was about 1953, 54.
Wow. Now, you spoke a few minutes ago about the article that was on CNN.com recently. How did that come to be?
Well, I don't know how he found me. Probably on Facebook or something. But, or somebody said they found me. I was still around. He contacted me. He was a kid. He used to watch the wrestling on Saturday afternoons. He said he used to come to the matches. On the afternoon matches, pay 50 cents to get in, and watch the TV show, which was aired in Minneapolis. Columbus, Ohio, excuse me. And that's how he used to watch me, and then he'd watch me on TV, and he'd see me at the matches. But Marion, Ohio, Columbus, and some of the towns around there, some Springfield and Dayton and all those cities we worked in. That's how he got the. Then he called me up and said, "Would you go for an interview?" I said, "Okay." So he wrote the story, and that's how I got on CNN, which I didn't realize at the time, but it gave me a big boost. Everybody started logging into me, you know. Even I think you must have found me too, huh?
Yeah, actually, JT found you. He unfortunately couldn't be with us today. He's attending some things in his outside life. And I know he wanted me to ask you for some of your memories of your time out there in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, I liked it up there. I like working up there for Owens and Harry Elliott. Of course, the winters weren't too bad. The trips weren't bad. We go up to Seattle and over to Spokane, and then go down to Portland, or we go all the way down to Eugene, and sometimes down to Medford and around. They kept us busy. But yeah, I liked living up there in that part of the country. And we went over to Coos Bay, and like I say, we traveled all over the territory. The territory was good. It kept us busy. And there was a restaurant there. I don't know if it's still there. It used to. Maybe you heard about it. Country Kitchen. Is it still there?
I'm not sure.
You're out of Portland, aren't you?
No. JT is out of Portland. He's not with us today. I live on the both Jay and I live on the East Coast.
Oh, okay. Well, probably JT would remember. And that's where old Haystack Calhoun came in there. And he ate a 5-pound roast in less than an hour, and you didn't have to pay for it. Well, and you got to eat all the trimmings too, So they gave us salad and bread, some carrot sticks and soup, and they poured everything they could. He asked for more seconds. They figured, he'll never eat that steak. And so when they finally brought the steak, he went through that thing like nothing. And he said, that was real good. He says, I'll be back tomorrow night for another one. They says, oh, no, you won't. You can't come back for a year. We'll put your picture on the wall as a champion steak eater, but you're not coming back here again.
Now,
he inhaled 5 pounds like it was nothing.
Now, do you have any message you'd like to tell all your fans out there?
Well, not much. I'm glad you're still around, and you still remember, and like I say, if they want to talk to me, I'm on Facebook. They can, log on to me. I'll try to get back to them, and talk to them, anything like that. That's about all I can do. And I guess computer has got some good sides to it also. We never had that in our day, Same with the tapes and the videos of today. All we had was film, and those films we made back in the 50s were shipped all over the world and lost, and then they went to Kinescope, and that was erased. So all our old matches were just, lost or gone. There are very few of them around. I did make one with Lou Thez back in the 50s in the Olympic Auditorium. That's called The Story of a Wrestler. It was about Lou, but I was in it with some of the other guys. And that's one of them that's still out there somewhere. But no, wait. That's another thing. Tape came in just about the time I was getting out of the business, and I missed out on all that.
I'll definitely make a point to put a link for the archive of this interview on there, so like fans who couldn't necessarily listen to us live, they can still hear what you have to say. I just want to say, first of all, thank you for coming on today. And as someone who had heard about you a lot growing up, it was It was definitely good to talk to you and hear some of these stories that you have to tell.
Okay, well, thanks for having me on there, and I guess you make a transcript of that. Maybe you can shoot it out my way if you get a chance. You can log or send it to me or whatever. If you do that, or do you?
We don't typically transcribe it. We have the audio up for download, but like I said, we'll definitely put a link for that on your Facebook page.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess publicity helps, you know. Somebody come along and say, hey, Fritz, maybe we'll just hire him, come out and give a speech, you know. There's always something in it for us, you know.
Right, definitely. And on behalf of Jay and, of course, JT, I'd like to again thank you for coming on and sharing some of these stories.
Okay, well, thanks for your time. I hope I got some of this across to you, you know. All right.